Aha! And we have Natalie. Natalie, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hello.
Ah, hello. Good.
You.
Sound is all good. I'm slightly quiet. I'm going to turn up my sound very slightly.
Okay, wonderful.
I think that only affects what I hear. It doesn't affect what you hear, I believe. Right.
No, I can hear you really well, so that's good.
Good. Yeah, I'm trying an experiment here. What I found is that Zoom meetings never start on time.
Right, okay.
Every now and again, you'll get some people who arrive 5 minutes early and some, which I try and encourage. But almost always people sort of come. I think sometimes meetings finish a little late. People are going from one to the next. So I'm experimenting today with putting this little background. I find these backgrounds slightly weird because the way your shape of your head flickers continuously. So this is a little message which I hope you can read. Is that in the right sequence for you? Is it, or is it reversed?
It's reversed for me, actually. So I know, sorry about that. I wish I could have said it was the right way.
Hold on, I'm going to let in a few more people. This is that time when people are milling around and coming in. Hold on.
Yeah.
I should be letting them in. Well, how come they're not coming in? There we go. Admit. There we go. There's Freya. Maxine. One or two others. Right. Okay. So my little experiment with kind of having an introductory message is rather backfired straight away. But let's say hello to a few people. Hello, folks. This is the milling around part whilst we wait for more people to arrive as they do. And what you're supposed to be seeing up here, what should be over my left shoulder, but I think for you is your right, a kind of welcome message. But what I haven't worked out is, unfortunately, is what the sequence is. So I'll have to explain this in a second. I'm going to let one or two more people in. Here's somebody who was struggling to get earlier, whose I think sound wasn't working. And we'll quickly run around just to check that everyone's camera is working, and then continue sort of nattering for a moment or two whilst one or two others arrive. Let's try. Can I just check, Bill? Can we just check that we have sound okay for you?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me.
That's great. Yeah, that's fine. Freya, we've met before, but let's just double check.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to go over to Minaxi. Hello, Minaxi. You are, I believe, new to the forums. Can we just unmute you to say hello? This is why it's always worth doing at the beginning. So Minaxi put something in the chat to say hi, which I suspect may mean. Now, every now and again, you get people in a large open plan office who actually do find that it's not letting me unmute. Let me try now. Okay, I'm asking you to unmute. Get Lee Murphy in, which would be lovely. I haven't seen Lee for a long time. And I'm going to, Minaxi will leave you for a moment, hoping that you can hear us. I'm going to go over to Laura. Laura, can we just check that we have sound for you? Oh, Minaxi is here. Hi Lee, we'll come back to you in a second. We're just in that kind of letting everybody in mode and checking sound. Minaxi, I can hear but not unmute. That's interesting. I'm clicking on unmute for you, Laura, and nothing seems to be happening. You also have your, Laura's picking on the headphones. That's what I love about new technology. It's a great leveler. Most of us, to one degree or another, are struggling to work out how the hell to make any of this work. I'm just going to try. No, we've got most people remuting. I'm just going to try getting Laura on video, and likewise. See. But in the meantime, let's go over Lee Murphy. I first met Lee, must be well over 10 years or more ago. It's great to see you again, Lee.
Good to see you. Yeah, it's been a while. I think summer of 2019, maybe.
it could easily be something along those
Yeah,
lines.
we've lost a year there, haven't we? We've lost a year or so.
Yeah, last weekend's got nothing on,
Yeah.
on the last decade. Meenakshi, we have vision for you. Does that mean we also have sound?
Yes, you do.
Excellent.
At
Lovely
last.
stuff.
Hi,
Okay.
everyone.
And Laura, we also have sound. We have vision for Laura, which means we probably have sound as well. Can we just
Yes, but
say
I
hi?
am in a cafe.
Good. I'm also going to listen.
So I'll be on mute for most of that.
And this actually gives a moment or two. Those of you who can do backwards reading, one of those tricks that when we were 13 or 14 we all learned to do at school. You'll see a little message up here. Unfortunately, I haven't worked out how Zoom reverses imagery. So that is actually a little message saying we usually start with a few minutes of sociable chatter whilst people are logging in. So settle yourself down and please do free to join in. This is my experiment with trying to use a little message like that. It obviously needs a little more work. Let's go over to Amanda, just to check that we have vision, so that probably means we have sound. Hello, Amanda, do we hear you?
Hello, how are
Yes,
you? Yay!
Good.
Nice to meet you all. Hello from the windy Wales.
Is it windy down where you are then?
Yeah, yeah, we've still got the it's been windy for the past 5 days. So
Yeah, it's not really stopped, has it?
no,
Although,
it hasn't.
yesterday, down here in Cornwall yesterday, we suddenly had glorious sunshine for a few hours right in the middle of the day, which was lovely. As you can see, folks, the intention here is to create a relatively flexible, chatty, amicable tone. So although this may just sound like I'm nattering, there's method in this madness. The idea is that we try and allow people to speak fairly freely. I'll also take the opportunity to mention, I do record these sessions because every now and again it's useful for me to go back to listen again to hear what somebody said. The usual principle I work on, there are exceptions, but the usual principle is the sort of Chatham House rules of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So to allow people to speak fairly freely, especially about dilemmas or things that they're finding a little awkward or things that the agency as a whole may be struggling with. So you can talk freely, or at least you can decide for yourself how freely to talk. This is a kind of don't pass it on or don't quote anybody afterwards. However, because it is a recording, if you find yourself thinking, oh, what was it she said just then? We can actually make copies of the recording available to anybody afterwards, but on the understanding that you don't pass it on. What you've learned from it, from the discussion, by all means do pass on, that is the point. But I think on the whole, it seems a wise precaution to say, let's keep it within the group at the moment. We do have a few others where you have a guest speaker, where that is intended to be more public, and we assume that will be more shared, and we can sometimes edit stuff out from there. So that, I think, covers our first 5 minutes or so whilst we're waiting for people to arrive. And I'm going to work on the assumption that if people are more than about 5 minutes late, it's either because they're struggling with something or other, or because they can't make it after all. A lot of people suddenly find something crops up, as you might expect. We have one person I've been rather interesting to meet. So just as I'm saying, 5 minutes is usually long enough. Of course, somebody else will arrive at this stage. In a second, Laura's saying it very loud in the cafe. Yes, Laura, we have, I know we have people in open plan offices sometimes where also they're not wanting to drown out the sound. So by all means, go mute for a while. And you can, of course, use the chat. And we're all familiar with how these things work, I imagine by now. If you want to speak, put up your hand or otherwise. Now, I'm just going to go over to Claire. Let's just check, Claire, that you do have sound and vision.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, Claire. Yes, we do hear you.
Hey, I got in. I don't have video because I've got a rubbish work computer today, but I have managed to get here. So
Great. Okay. Oh, Laura's saying she has to leave early. Laura, it's perfectly fine. Everybody has to pop in and out. We've all, well, you've all got busy jobs to do. This is just what I do. So it's easier for me to commit. Let's work on the assumption that if somebody is more than 10 minutes arriving, as I was in the midst of saying, it's because they've got some technical difficulty and who knows how long that time may last. I'm now going to work our way around the circle as I see it, as you're tiled on my screen. And I'll ask everybody to take just a minute or so just to say who you are and what brings you here. What's your interest in this particular topic today? So my circle starts with Natalie. So hello, Natalie.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. My name's Natalie. I work at a housing association in South Wales called Caredig. We recently rebranded from Family Housing, so it's we're still in that stage of saying what we were formerly called to avoid any confusion. I joined the organisation about 8 months ago now. Our PI journey, I suppose, started in 2019. So it's initiated before I started, and I was brought on to kind of just help the journey along and actually have a lead in place. So I'm very excited to join the forum today. I think it'll be really interesting to have that space to discuss the dilemmas and challenges, but also what's going really well. So yeah, lovely to meet you all.
Spot on. We often have people formally or informally as PI leads at these forums, but this is the first time we've had something specifically to talk about the issues around being a PI. Natalie, can I just check? You said you're a housing association. Is that a general needs housing association with a care and support wing, or are you a specialist supported accommodation service?
It's general needs with a care and support branch. So I work within the care and support section, but yeah, I work across the organisation.
Yeah. And that tends to bring particular difficulties sometimes in knowing how broad to try and spread this and who your main focus is and so on. I hope we may have one or two other people joining, if not today, then other times. And of course, we have two people from Wales. So let's not just go around the circle. Let's go straight over to Amanda and let's keep let's have the Celtic fringe all started together.
Hi there, so I'm Amanda. I work for United Welsh, which is a housing association in Wales. I work in the Thrive department, which is, I guess, supported accommodation, specialist housing services. So our older person services within the Thrive service, as well as my specialist area, which is working with 16 to 25-year-olds. So we all the specialist bits are in the supported element, but we also have quite a large general needs section of the housing association. So I guess PI really is being led by us in specialist services, and we're trying to embed it within our own service in order that we can, I guess, filter it out to our general needs accommodation services.
Yeah. Who often are struggling with people with complex needs, but without the job description that gives them the access to the training sometimes, which is one of the issues we'll often find, that it's the support division who are providing the support to the staff, to the other staff. So let us move on round. I'm going to go over to Bill.
Hi.
Hello, Bill.
So I'm Bill. I work for Crisis, which is a national homeless charity, and I'm working at the centre in Birmingham. So we've got 11 centres around the UK, kind of randomly distributed around the UK. And I've been working for Crisis just coming up for 2 years. So it started just as we went into lockdown, and Crisis as a whole is looking, I think quite seriously, on and off anyway, at implementing PI. And I guess what I'm interested in is, with all the kind of the national stuff that's going on, what what can I do to be part of implementing Pi locally at my centre? For those of you that excuse me, don't know Crisis, at the centres, that's where we have service. We're not an accommodation provider, we're a services provider, and we provide services to people experiencing homelessness, broadly defined. And so I'll be working in my centre with about another 25 staff who split between people who are mainly doing some sort of teaching role. We do lots of classes and trying to skill people up for employment and interest, all that kind of stuff. And we have a team of, we call them lead workers. They're caseworkers, essentially trying to work with people using a coaching model. So I'm just trying to think about more and try to get some more ideas about what it means to implement Pi locally. Yeah, that's probably enough about me. Rambling on.
That's the whole idea.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference, as I see it, between rollout, implementing, embedding, and so on, just to unpack that language a little bit. Worth mentioning is one of our most regular members here, John McGlone, got involved with Crisis through some of your educational things, and has now ended up on a sort of national service user involvement role. It's unfortunate he's not able to be here today, but we've heard a lot from him about the work that Crisis is doing there. And the logical thing, I think, is to go over now to Freya.
You've got a good memory. Yes, I'm Freya. I'm also a psychologist in Crisis. So whilst Bill's in Birmingham, I'm down in London. But only 2 days a week in the Crisis Centre, and 3 days a week I'm in the Housing First team. So that's a lot more like outreaching sort of work. And yeah, I guess I feel similar to Bill in terms of there's been lots of structural changes in Crisis, which London has felt enormously over the past couple of years, and now it's being sort of happening elsewhere. And I think it's how to keep Pi in everybody's minds when there's so much to think about. And well, it's how to make sure these changes happen in a Pi way. That's the ultimate dream. So yeah, it's just always some of these conversations just helps me keep it alive, learn.
Yeah, but if you have to face a lot of other changes, those are actually really good times to have the Pi framework and say, how do we do this? And Freya, am I right in thinking you have a joint role? You partly work in one of the centres, and you also have another role in other.
So it's the Housing First team. So yeah, 2 days a week in the centre, 3 days a week in the Housing First team. So yeah, my brain's always trying to think about how to do it. Like I tend to go to Housing First. I'm a bit biased, so it'll be good to see, like, Bill can keep me thinking about how to do it for the Crisis Centre.
And we have discussions on Pies and Housing First coming up, as I'm sure. And I suspect Housing First is going to come up as an issue as we move on around. I'm going to go next to Lee to say hello and to say who you are and what you do.
Hi, yeah, Lee Murphy. I work at Single Homeless Project, which is a specialist single homelessness charity and registered housing association and registered charity, about 45 years old. I've been there 2.5 years. I manage a thing called the Opportunities Programme, which is essentially a kind of social engagement project using art, music, gardening and green activity, sport, health. We've got a recovery team and a psychotherapies team. And then recently, just after New Year, took on the Pi lead role, if you like, or responsibility for SHP. So that means managing reflective practice lead, which we now have, hopefully soon a co-production lead. And also we've got some psychology posts embedded in particular projects contracted to specific services or across pathways. Yeah, that's me.
Okey-dokey. And previously, before moving to SHP, you'd worked with St Mungo's, had you not?
Yes, I have. Yeah, sorry. So I worked for St Mungo's for 20 years before then. And for the last 12 years of those, I managed a psychotherapy service. So that was doing some client therapy work, but also had a Pi input, a Pi role. So they the psychotherapists did reflective practice, facilitation, some complex case discussion, contributed some thinking around the kind of St. Mungo's frame of Pi. And then before that, I did lots of other roles.
We got previous.
I've got previous, a lot of previous.
And we're going to go over now to Meenakshi. Meenakshi, a pleasure to actually put a face to the name.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to meet everyone. So I work for a London local authority, Camden Council. We've got a range of supported accommodation. The team that I work with commissions the supported accommodation for single homeless people. And our strand of supported accommodation has been a pioneering Pi in the council for, I would say, the last 5 years. We started off with a very small pilot in one of the services, and through the psychologist that was involved in that service, we developed a training program for staff, and we've been over the years rolling out that training program to support staff within the different services. We've got 16 services and a housing first service, and from April 3 of those services will have psychologists on their staff team. So I work very closely now with Lee because each of those 3 different services are in fact delivered by SHP, and they'll have a psychologist. So the other thing that we've done over that period is try and roll out Pi across all the services, whether or not they have a psychologist, and get them to start using things like the Pi self-assessment. So we are now, when we commission services, we talk about commissioning services that are Pi. So, you know, I think we've sort of rolled out Pi within our services. For me, it's we're at the stage of sort of embedding and trying to raise standards, make Pi consistent across the different services. I think there's a lot of unevenness in our development of Pi, so-called Pi services. Yeah, so that's where we're at, and that's my interest for coming to this, because you were talking about rollout and embedding Pi.
Bear with me a second, folks. I'm slightly distracted because we've had one person trying to get into the conversation, but sort of flickering in and out. So I may need to just keep on going back to let her in. Plus we have one other person, Esther, who we have seen many times here. Hello, Esther, nice to see you again. Let's give you a moment to settle in, and then you can explain who you are. You're used to this routine, I know. But let's go over now to Claire to say hello. Claire, you're still having trouble with your video.
Hello. Yep.
But we can hear you fine.
Good. My name's Claire. I work in Norfolk in a project that is a partnership between Together for Mental Wellbeing, who I work for, Mind, and St Martin's Housing Trust. It's called the NICS service, which is Norfolk Integrated Housing Community Support Service, which is a nice snappy title. We work with people with mental health and complex needs across all of Norfolk. So that's some supported housing and quite a lot of community work as well. I'm a peer support coordinator. I've lived experience of mental health, and my interest here is I seem to be tasked in the role of pulling together an evaluation, because this service is commissioned as a Pi, but no one's really ever paid attention to that. We're now nearly 4 years into a contract where we've been firefighting, and we've got a set of service measures set by commissioners, which are all around activity hours. Attention's paid a lot to this, but not actually to the ethos of the service. So it's kind of like I'm also doing a master's degree on the back of this in mental health recovery and social inclusion. And because of that, I kind of went to the ODM and said, oh, what's happening with this? And they showed me a very tick box evaluation of what they were doing. And I said, do you want me to take that away and have a consideration around it in line with my master's degree? And they said yes. So that's where I am. So I've sort of been thrust into this sort of role, really, which is quite scary but very exciting. And actually, we're just starting this process, but it is capturing people's imagination. So hopefully we might start to sort of snapshot where we are, because we do things that are in line with Pi. It's just putting that in and then and actually paying mind to it.
Bear with me a second. I am again distracted for a brief moment. Okay, and am I right, Claire, that you have a relatively new centre? You opened up a new building a couple of years or so with some of the sort of Pi thinking in terms of the way you deployed the built environment itself.
No, not really.
I may be mixing you up with somewhere else.
Yeah. You may be mixing me up. We sort of inherited supported how the sort of contract was formed by these three people in partnership, and we sort of inherited supported housing projects, which, to be honest with you, I worked in before. They don't look very different or feel very different. So I think people are acknowledging that we need to pay a bit of mind, really, to the way that we do things if we're saying we're a Pi service.
Okay, thanks, Claire. We can come back to you at any point. I'm just going to ask Esther to say hello, introduce yourself in the same way. Esther, we can't run around the whole circle, but I'm sure you'll pick up who we all are at some point, and then we can open up the discussion just more flexibly. Quite a nice small number here, so I think we can probably end up all unmuted so that people can join in wherever, rather than me having to sort of orchestrate. But let's see how it goes. Esther, let's ask you to unmute and say hello.
Hello everybody, sorry to have joined late. I wasn't expecting to be here at all, so this is a nice surprise. Yeah. What can I say? I'm an independent practitioner. My practice has evolved in recent years to become one solely focused on reflective practice for a number of organisations and two local authorities. I think I've said in the past, Robin, before COVID, I was actually physically working between Swansea and the Isle of Wight, but I'm now based in my office, although I will admit to going to Southampton yesterday. Yes, so that's what I've been doing. Very interested in Pi. I've done a couple of pizzazz exercises with two organisations recently, just waiting to catch up with those. Been attending the forums for about a year when they really first started. The moment I have a specific interest, and I want to catch up with you, Robin, around that, as to how to start some discussions on Pi when working virtually, when working online. You know, what's that all about? So if anyone's interested, that would be great, and I'll hopefully catch up with you later, Robin. So yep. That's me.
Certainly, one of my frustrations, as many of you will have gathered, was that the entire website, including this, went offline in January. One of those ridiculously small admin errors, not even one of mine, I should say. I make plenty enough, but it just took forever to unscramble. But if it weren't for that, one of the ideas I'd have was to have a discussion. We've had this sort of concertina of the program slightly, to have a discussion on how we can use the internet, Zoom, Teams, and so on, as a kind of environment in its own right, and the strengths, the difficulties, the skills we would need to learn about how to make this work. Because there are certainly some examples of places that have really found this incredibly useful, and other people find you're bleached out, you're in 2D. It's there's a sort of thinness sometimes to it.
Yeah.
relationships between people. But unfortunately, I've had to put that back to the summer season. There will be a summer season.
Okay.
What I'd like to suggest is that I start out with just a few thoughts, throw in a few hand grenades really, but just to get us started. I wanted to talk a little bit about the similarities and the differences between the words roll out, implement, and embed, all of which I've used at times. Rollout I see as being the issue you have when a larger organization or a network wants to develop the pie idea through its services. And rollout should not obviously be a steamroller. It should be more like making pastry for pastas and so on, where each individual unit is kind of developed in its own way, more like sort of flams or pastry cakes or whatever. But the idea with rollout, as I see it, is that you have an organization that as a whole wants to take this further, wants to take it on, but exactly how, where, how consistent to be, whether to focus on the areas that are struggling first, or whether to focus as much and encourage the areas that are doing well in the hope that they will bring others along with them. When you have, as we often do, one or two areas that are much further advanced, much further developed, the question is, how can you use those as a resource to encourage? In other words, there's quite complex diplomacy and quite difficult issues sometimes in some areas that a manager would be dealing with. And so just a chance to sort of talk over some of the dilemmas that we do sometimes find, I thought might be quite helpful, and hence wanting to make this a sort of safe space. You will find, I'm afraid, that I'm uncomfortable with the word implement. I know that when people talk about implement, what they mean is something like rolling it out, taking it forward and so on. But implement to me is one of those words where if you know what you want to happen at the end of the day, you implement a process to make what you already wanted to happen. Whereas an awful lot of the pie approach, as I see it, is letting each team find its own way forward. And there is a tension, I think, between saying we want to implement it through the organization and saying we want each organization to own the process itself and to come up with what they can do in their particular setting that will be different, because the geography is different, sometimes because the nature of the service, the partnership arrangements with other organizations, the opportunities to grow and to develop will be different. And so, so on the one hand, I find the term implement sometimes a little bit too mechanical. I know that's not what's intended, but it's something I'm just conscious of. However, having said that, the pizzazz, for example, I mean, evaluation has come up quite a lot already in this conversation. The pizzazz, I think you can see as an implement, but I think of it more like a sculptor's chisel. A chisel is an implement, but when a sculptor picks up a chisel, does he or she know what the sculpture is going to look like at the end? You may have a broad vision, but exactly what you're going to find when you start chiseling away. I think that's quite a useful way of looking at implementing and rollout and so on as a quite complex, quite sophisticated, quite subtle process. And finally, we've had talk of embedding. One of the things that came up a lot the first couple of seasons was the importance of the pie idea, the pie spirit, but even the pie framework, not being just something in your frontline services. Some people I know aren't happy with the term frontline. But the idea that the whole organization needs to back and be behind this, and in fact with your service user involvement as well, but also the agencies you work with, as a horizontal networking with other organizations, and of course talking with your commissioners about having the freedom, the flexibility. We've started using the term embed to mean something which pervades the whole organization and not just something that your frontline services are commissioned to do. So that's the way I use those three words, and hopefully that may help provoke some further thoughts or some other issues that that others may have. And at that point, I would hope to be able to sit back and not be the expert here. After all, I'm not a PI lead. I'm not a manager in an organization. I don't work for homelessness services. You guys do. You guys actually are doing this. All I'm doing is bringing you together to facilitate as best I can. So that is quite enough for me. I'd now like to sit back and hear what other people might have to throw in.
Robin, shall I sort of start, because I've been involved in a couple of pizzazz exercises.
I think you got in just in front of Minaxi, so let's go to you first, and we'll
okay.
we'll
No,
follow Minaxi afterwards.
Of course.
No, go ahead. You were there. You did get in first by a whisker.
Oh, who, me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, misunderstood. Yeah, what you're saying about PI is something that's been obvious in previous sessions, and as you were talking, I was thinking, PI is not dogmatic, it's creative and it's reflexive, and it is for every organisation to use it as they think fit. And it's not like, it's not an eye-rolling exercise for organisations and teams to think, oh, here we go, here's the latest buzzword, this won't last, etc., and be cynical about it and see it as something else to do when we're all busy. Oh, what the heck. But there's a lot of lovely reflective questions in PI that really do make people think. And I've been fortunate enough in sort of picking up the wisdom of so many others who've been coming to the groups to sort of use bits of PI, use bits of pizzazz in reflective practice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really helpful. But sort of really what I'm trying to get across is this whole thing about it not being dogmatic, that it is creative, it is reflexive, and sort of just chill with it. Really, it's not that daunting.
Just chill with it.
Just chill with it. Make it yours.
This is some of the conversations that Esther and I have had where we talked about reflective practice, and some people going, oh God, that's a bit scary. Hold on, it's not open heart surgery. It is about helping you do your job better. Yeah. It's not, it's not a form of psychotherapy. Wow. It's a complicated boundary, of course. Sometimes it can be. So enough for me. I'm going to go over to Minaxi because you were right on the verge of saying something.
Yeah, I'm really conscious that I'm the only commissioner in the room, and so I suppose I'm coming from it from that angle.
Mm-hmm.
And
please do.
So I'm going to give the example of the self-assessment, and as a commissioner, I've made it clear to our services that that's a tool for them to use for their own benefit. We want them to sort of try and integrate the tool into any sort of service review, team reviews, if they have like an annual meeting to reflect on their work, etc. So tried to emphasize very much that it's a tool for them to use. So that's where I'm coming from on the self-assessment. And we're not as commissioners asking for any evidence of any actions or activities or anything else that they might have done as a result of the self-assessment. And I think I feel that we've really controlled ourselves over that. but I do want some way of showing that our service is a Pi service. Now I get what you're saying about each venue, each service is going to be slightly different. What Pi means within that service, particularly to do with the environment, is going to be very different. But is there something about the look and feel and experience that we can capture as a commissioner that will tell me that we've got a service that is working in a Pi way? Is what I'm I really struggle with, you know, and just this thing about one service might be at the very early stage of developing their Pi, and we've definitely, the ones with the psychologists in their services, we see them as the leaders in Pi, and we'll tell the other services, well, look to see what they're doing. Yeah, so it's you know, coming from the commissioner's angle, yeah, I'm always looking for a bit of evidence, I suppose.
So would you like me to give an observation on that, or because I'm kind of being interested to, I have got something I could usefully say, I think, but I'll be interested to hear from others about what you would see as being the kind of information that a commissioner should be hoping for, and that you'd be wanting to talk to them about. So it's a dialogue and not just a measurement. But other people have any thoughts on this?
Not specifically just commission services, but I guess in my new role, one of the things we have done is spend a lot more time in documenting work, getting testimony from various stakeholders, clients, workers, managers, just really kind of just trying to showcase what we're doing, really, rather than only just measuring, but just to sort of get a sense of the experience, because in a way, that's how I would probably see the work, is we're trying to create positive experiences for people, ostensibly probably of relationships in various forms, for a group of people who've probably had a really, well, usually have had a really bad experiences of relationships. So in a sense, if you can get people to talk about that, that's the experience of something. Other people, themselves, seeing themselves through other people's eyes, seeing them, the change in the environment. So sort of just using different ways to do that, often either through audio, interview, or just testimony, blog type pieces, video. We've done lots of video over the last 2 years. Now, this has mainly been through my particular job, which is a sort of social engagement project. So we're using social approaches through sport, art, green activity in various forms, a recovery team, which uses everything from kind of citizenship type activities to sort of co-production, get to be part of the decision-making process. How do they have more of a stake within the service? But equally, we're also getting staff to say stuff about what informs their work, what sort of rocks their boat, where are they coming from, what do they value in the work. So it's just about sort of just describing almost what it is people are doing already, rather than only like what should they be doing. So I think if you can kind of shift things that way, then people maybe feel a little bit more confident, and then we can kind of begin to say, okay, well, where might we want to go, as well as what it is that we're doing. So it's just trying to be a bit more present in terms of how you document the work, I think, is what that's what I've been doing. But now I'm also being tasked, as you are, Meenakshi, in a way, of making stuff happen as well. So now that I'm going to be the Pi lead, there is also a sort of an organizational task. How do you bring some of that stuff to central services, make it more systemic, not only think about my smaller gang, which is like the funky stuff, you know, art projects, music projects, you know, going on walking tours, developing an archive project, you know, really engaging type things. So there's a bit of a balance there really about sort of bringing the curiosity and interest back into it for both clients and also for staff, but also the sort of how do we push things forward a little bit and how do you measure it without sort of turning everyone off.
And how do you measure it without killing it? Amanda, sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I noticed you were nodding quite vigorously at that talk about the embedding. Is that an opportunity for me to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm really lucky in the fact that I'm setting up a new service within United Welsh, specifically working with 16 to 25-year-olds. So we're kind of embedding Pi and the whole principles of Pi right at the very start. And I think we've been also really fortunate in that we've had development time from Welsh Government funding to be able to have quite a long lead into services rather than, I guess, the normal commissioning kind of roller coaster and cycle that people are used to within supporting people and homelessness services, that, you know, we've been able to, I guess, kind of think about these things for quite a long time. So, you know, we're looking at our evaluation framework and we've kind of taken a step back from the, I guess, our traditional measures of that whole supporting people 1 to 5 kind of business, because, you know, it doesn't mean anything to me, it doesn't mean anything to the young people that we'll be working with, and it just becomes, I guess, really just a fruitless exercise for everybody, doesn't it? So, you know, we're very much kind of part of our evaluation is about looking at people's journeys and the young people themselves doing, I guess, some of that stuff that Lee's been talking about that oral history, those video stories, those kind of snapshots in time about young people. And certainly we've been doing it as we've been renovating and refurbishing the properties that are coming into service and trying to take, I guess, a pie look at that environment and what a good environment is, and having young people helping us with the design stage of it and making sure that we've got lots of light in there and we're not doing institutional colors, and you know, we're not putting notice boards everywhere, and kind of trying to reflect on their experiences that they've had and trying to make it just a home for somebody at the end of the day. And, you know, we're, again, because we're kind of doing light touch support, you know, we're in a fortunate position. We don't have to have an office or a set base within those projects either. So yeah, I think time is a massive, I guess, issue and resource that often we don't have, particularly with that commissioning cycle. So yeah, and then I think in terms of kind of that further embedding, you know, we've been trying to bring on board rolling out Pi in a very small way to our colleagues in development who you know, who are obviously in charge of the, you know, the kind of the structures and the buildings and things like that, to kind of get them to understand it's, I guess, and meet some of the young people that are going to live in the homes that they're developing and building and refurbishing, so that they get that, I guess, lived experience understanding. But I guess our challenge is about matching that nice stuff that Lee talks about with other outside, I guess, influences that we have to meet, you know, kind of reporting for rent arrears and stuff like that, and void rates and things. And so yeah, I guess it's also kind of understanding you know, trying to feed up through into our senior management team and our exec team that, you know, avoid rates or a rent arrear rate, you know, is, you know, if we can have a really good PI service, then things like rent arrears and void rates will come down. But it will take time to get there. And it's a learning curve for all of us.
Yeah. Could I come in there with a couple of thoughts? Robin, I was looking back over the pie slides that were in that pie day in Bristol some years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And in those pie slides, there is a whole load of information about young people's services. And I can't remember for the life of me who did it, who was a presenter. But I've got the slides. I'm wondering if they're of any use.
If we talk about the same event, it was 1625 independent people.
It was,
Presented
yeah.
specifically on young people. So that would be Don Wood.
Yeah, and they had, I think they had an assessment of a review for young people to review the service. I'm just wondering, I don't know, Robin, if you've got the slides, or Manzi, you want me to send them to you? I can easily do that. So that just clicked in my mind because I was looking at it for about something else this morning. Meenakshi, you're talking about being a commissioner and wanting evidence. I don't know if this is relevant, but I'll run it past you anyway. One of the organisations I work with in Wales, a few months ago approached them and said, look, you know, you've got PI very much at the forefront of your service ethos. And I was being a bit cheeky because I said, you know, what evidence have you got for commissions? And so what we did was we focused on one service. When I didn't do the whole organization, it's impossible. So we just focused on one project and did the project with them. And I've got a meeting with a lead on that on Friday. But one way of doing it, which makes it, I think, quite sort of not so daunting, is just to take one section of pizzazz and work with that, you know, right through, and then, you know, do another assessment at the end. So you've got where you started and where you've ended up. So it becomes a reflective exercise and evidence, and inviting the team to reflect on how they've done it and what they did, what's good practice. So
well, Esther, thanks for that, because that was something I had at one point thought I probably ought to mention, and how I think I may have given a misleading impression, or maybe I've just learned from my mistakes in the last few years or so. Although I'd wanted the pizzazz to be quite generalist, so it would apply in any area, and quite holistic, so you did have all things together, as well as being quite permissive, allowing each organisation or service to find its own way. I think one of the downsides of the holistic intention is that people were sometimes left with the impression that you had to do the entire lot. You had to do all of this, and you had to clean it, and you needed at least a whole away day with the whole team, and so on. As you say, some consultants and trainers working with services have said, let's work on one issue. Let's take one particular issue. I know some organizations where they said, we as an organization want to focus on one particular bit of it, and you don't have to. You can't prioritize everything. So on the one hand, individual services may have particular issues that they need to address. So sometimes it's important that they choose their own issue to focus on, because they are the ones who know what they're struggling with. But it's also sometimes quite valuable to say, let's all look at reflective practice. Let's all look at the experience of women in our services.
Mm.
Let's all look at the colour schemes or the training courses or whatever. So you have some consistency. So that could be a way to balance rollout, which is a sort of universalist approach, with allowing each individual. That was Bill, I think, saying goodbye to them. Oh no, that was Bill himself saying goodbye. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. That although it is a holistic model, you don't have to do everything all in one go. I have a slightly tongue-in-cheek version called the coffee break pizzazz, which I know one or two people have seen, which suggests that you can do the whole thing quite informally in a 10-minute chat with somebody at a bus stop. You obviously don't go into great depth, but in principle, it doesn't need to be this whole massive rigorous process of everything. You do as much as you can, as much as is useful to you at the time. I did say I've got one or two other thoughts to throw in. I think, Meenakshi, that is a really, really important question that you raised there. You want it to be all flowers blooming kind of thing, but also the commissioners do need something other than enthusiasm to go on. And Toby Love, I know we're talking a lot about trust, the importance of trust being crucial. Without it, you just get gaming of the system. But what can we offer you? What can the practitioners say? These are the things we'd like you to look at. Before we go back to that, before I say anything more, anybody else have any other observations, any other thoughts they'd like to throw in as to what you would suggest?
If I can just come in for a second, I think we're sort of having a lot of the difficulties that Lee and Amanda touched on, really. I think because Karen Support is sort of the hub of our PI work, I feel like it's going really well and everyone's really on board, and I feel like, you know, we are able to kind of evaluate our progress, you know, through kind of service visits and surveys and kind of interviews with service users. But it is that kind of sense that we're the hub and we think that it's all going well and everyone's on board. But then if you kind of look a little bit further out into the rest of the organisation, it is seen as a buzzword and something new that, you know, why do we need it? And is this sort of more work? And it's, I think, something that's on our sort of priority list now is just really kind of being able to apply the principles to the different teams just in a way that makes sense to them. So I think it's quite a big piece of work, but I think sort of until we do that, it's really difficult to kind of evaluate and monitor how other teams are doing if we're kind of all at different places with it. So I really I concur with what's been said, really.
Oh, okay. Various people are saying they'd be interested in talking with or hearing from Dom at 1625. I can't obviously promise that he'll get in touch with everybody, but I can at least ask him if he'd be willing to. There's a few others in his team who might equally be interested. Okay, well, shall I throw in some of the things I was thinking of in terms of Meenakshi's question? Conversation a month or so ago, no, before Christmas, with Victoria Asiavatam, who's the commissioner in Westminster, whom Meenakshi, I'm sure you will know, and Emma Williamson from ANIMO. Obviously, they do a lot of PI training within the London area, psychologist, but working with SLAM, the South London and Maudsley Mental Health Trust. So they were very early on in developing psychology input into the whole, not just the hostels, but the whole hostel pathway in immediate South London. And one of the things they were saying was that they're really getting more and more enthusiastic about moving on to using the PI abacus as a larger, more systemic overview of services and networks. But what they were concerned about was what information commissioners would ask, what commissioners would want, as to what their findings were, the score even that they came up with as to who was struggling, who was making progress. I've always said the score is the least important part. It's the discussion and the action plan that's actually what really matters. That's what works. That's the engine of change. The score is often more unhelpful, but certainly when when people were worried about whether commissioners would see a low score as reflecting badly on their service, rather than reflecting them being more ambitious and more frustrated by what they weren't doing, which is actually a good sign, especially when you're helped out by others. And so they were saying that what they'd really like is some kind of guidance that went out to commissioners, and that actually said, please don't ask us for the actual score. Because as soon as you this is again a line of Toby Lowe's, as soon as you use a measure as a target, you get gaming of the system, you get dishonest measurement, and the whole thing has broken. So what can you put in its place? Well, there's a couple of things which are, I don't think they're really robust as measures, but I would be interested in the discussion you have with services, and I would ask two questions. Firstly, what are they most proud of? It's almost like taking a strengths model approach. Get them talking about what they're proud of, and you will really get the feel of that organization. It'll be different for each organization, so you can't necessarily compare, but you'll certainly get the discussion going. And also I would ask, what do they need from you? Because I think that would also say a lot about what's holding them up, without it necessarily being what's happening within their own service. I think we're increasingly seeing the systems and the pathways and the gaps and barriers as being really significant blockages for lots of services. I was talking with somebody last week who was saying when somebody is referred to them, they don't even necessarily get the person's name. The person is just sent down there by the locals or housing. This is Northern Ireland, so the language is rather different. And they were saying, what we need is not a massive referral process, but we need to talk with people who are sending their people to us about how we can work more constructively. That's what you need from the other people. So you may well get a lot of quite valuable information as a commissioner from hearing what people need from you, rather than what they will sort of show you in a sort of apple for the teacher kind of way. But the third thing, there's also service user assessments, of course, but the third thing I wanted to put in, the whole Pizzazz approach was built upon something developed in education, as I think you may have with the iAbacus originally. And my wife, as it happens, had also worked in education, part of the senior management team at the university she was at. And there, they have members of their team who are sent out every now and again to inspect effectively another course doing similar work. It is a peer review model. So you're not sending in an authority figure, somebody who has the kind of control over the budgets or your final assessments in the way that Ofsted, for example, would. The abacus was set up with Ofsted inspections. What would we do instead of Ofsted inspections as a sort of objective measure? And that's why I had suggested peer review between comparable services, or even possibly not very comparable services. Just to say, to invite somebody else in to have a look at your service, have a look at your workings, what you're thinking about it, and you do the same for them. You could even have a three-way network where A assesses B, B assesses C, and C assesses A. And you wouldn't get detailed feedback there, but you would at least have some way of knowing that the services aren't just marking their own homework. Now, I'm not so sure it's a solution to all problems, but I think that idea of peer review, of horizontal accountability, being responsible to the other agencies in your service, I'd have a lot of interest in that, but I'd also have a certain amount of trust in that. I can see ways in which you might want to do more than that, and so on. Who you choose as your peer reviewer might say a lot about the confidence you have in your service. But I built that in as the fifth stage of the Pizzazz because I think we do need to move towards more horizontal accountability. I have more faith in that than I do in what you might call vertical proving your worth. So those were the things I was wanting to throw in. It is a holistic model, but you can do bits of it, as Esther was saying. Don't demand a high score, because you will then get something that messes up effectively the whole process. But have a look at things like peer review, getting people talking to each other about how they feel they're doing. They will learn an awful lot about it. And what I've found so far, as I can see, is that when you do peer review, people tend to underestimate their strengths. They are more modest, they are more shy. We've had people coming and saying, well, actually, I think that's pretty damn good. I think that's really interesting what you're doing. It does wonders for morale. I can see how it might go disastrously wrong if you're not careful. But I think it's part of lifting the lid on the pizzazz process that I would like to encourage people to look at.
I think that's a great idea, peer review. I think we have suggested it when we first introduced the self-assessments within the Camden services, but I think services, I think they hadn't even got their heads around doing the self-assessment, let alone thinking about the peer review. But I think that is something that maybe with Lee, we could have a conversation about doing that. The other thing that we had been thinking about, and it came more out of conversations with service users and experts by experience, is maybe doing something. We used to do like an unannounced visit to services, and we've been mulling over whether we do something using experts by experience, going and visiting services and seeing what they say about the look and feel of a service is.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. One of the things I have been toying with is the possibility of producing a version of the pizzazz, let alone the Priapicus, where the language is more about service users' experience. At the moment, the language is a services language. It is about service specification, it's kind of management and so on. And we've had a number of discussions about whether or not we can actually put the same issues from the perspective of the person, of the service users. I think it's a great idea. One of the stumbling blocks is that the language that you might use in Glasgow might be very different from the language you'd use in Norwich. I mean, literally, the language you would use. And because any pizzazz or Priapicus process needs somebody who is taking you through it, we're all having to translate this quite generalized language into what it means in this particular situation. So maybe that task of translating is something that your PI lead or your what's the word we use, the scribe. If you had somebody from an advocacy team, say, coming in and working with the service user group, they can maybe do the work of putting it into the language of the service user of that group. Because again, a drug and alcohol service user group is going to use different language from a youth project or a women's service. So the idea of trying to come up with something that was service user language based, in the end, I kind of backed off from it. I'm sure you'll all be familiar with the outcome star. At the last count, I think there are 47 different outcome stars, because they decided they would produce an outcome star for each particular client group or setting. And I've had discussions with Joy McKeith about it. Whereas I went the other way. Let's have one single framework that you then have to customize to each setting. There are downsides to that single framework approach. But the alternative seems to be the sort of 47 outcome stars that don't join up. I think probably it's worth working with the downside, but it does rely an awful lot on a PI lead in each agency, interpreting it in the language and the context and the client group and so on of your particular client group. And that's one of the reasons why I think the idea of a PI lead is seems to be quite crucial.
Yeah, Robin, you've given your inspiration. You've given me an idea for something I've been struggling with, which was a front helpline workers were a bit kind of questioning the language used in an advertising campaign. Is what we're doing actually being presented properly, or as we would like it to work for us? So the simple answer to that is, well, why don't you set up a meeting with that particular part of operations to come and talk to you about it, and you can ask them, which is that horizontal sort of peer review, because everyone's got a mindset of top down, and this sort of management pyramid. It can seem rather sort of, I don't know, autocratic sometimes. Something I found really useful is to stop looking for answers and start looking for questions. And here it is, folks. 1001 solution-focused questions. And I have found that incredibly helpful, having been tasked recently with finding 3 questions which are generic, which can be applied to any part of an organization. I did come up with them, but actually I found framing a question, I always find it much, much harder work than I ever think it's going to be. You might find that helpful, Lee, that because it's got all kinds of different project questions to ask. And you, Lee, you mentioned something that was really, I think, at the heart of all the work is relationships. And the only thing I can think of where you'd get a measure of that qualitatively is on, if anyone's heard of outcome rating scales or session rating scales. Yeah, you might want to use a session rating scales, because there's a question there about the relationship with the actual support worker or whoever's doing it. That might give you some clues. It can be a bit faffy because you've got to use a ruler to kind of measure it, but if you Googled ORS, SRS, outcome rating scale, session rating scales, you just sign up for a free license if you wanted to use it. I mean, it's a pretty simple measure because it doesn't have numbers in it. Someone just puts a line through a horizontal line. Freya, have you used it?
Yeah, so I use it in so if I have mostly in consultation sessions with with the staff that I do, as opposed to with members. So that's how we call people use our service members. But yeah, I mean, I've only been in crisis since July, so I've got to, I'll get more into it, hopefully. I'm not somebody who's great at using outcome measures. I'm a lot more like follow feedback.
Been fast work, Freya, hasn't it?
Fast work.
Esther or whoever could you put those initials into the chat so that everyone else can do it? It's ORS, SSFRS.
I'll type it in now. Outcome.
I was just, Esther, were you still talking? I don't want to come in.
No, I'm typing.
Oh, you're good. Yeah. No, I just didn't want to interrupt you at all. I was just thinking about, Robin, when you talked about the sort of peer, and I hope this is relevant. Stop me if it's not. The peer sort of rate or I guess evaluations or reviewing is sort of, in what I often come across is that the coaches that I work with have such brilliant relationships with the people we work with, and they feel so strongly about advocating for them, and really trauma-informed, psychological, like so much theory is on their mind. And the problem with the relationship is often with other services and feeling, well, they don't get the people we work with. It really makes Vicky Reynolds often talks
horizontal embedding.
Yeah, exactly. And I always, Vicky Reynolds is someone she's always on my mind. I feel like she's a bit like somebody on my shoulder. I don't know if that's a person, a Canadian woman who works with people in the opioid crisis and lots of homeless folk in Canada. And she often talks about, services like ours can become like the lone wolf who's here to save the person. And sometimes I get really just conscious of that way of working. And I was thinking, if we do more peer sort of reviewing, how does that lend to then conversations rather than feeling like, oh, they're bad, we're good? It then opens up a dialogue, doesn't it? Like, because we know that, we've got to use this idea that everybody comes into this work with the best intentions, with the hope to do good. But the stress.
Freya, your volume is very, very erratic. It's toing and froing a lot. It may be where your microphone is.
Oh, I don't know. Sorry, I get this problem quite often. How is that?
That's fine.
I wonder if I have to hold this white thing here.
Yeah, I think it may be that as you move around, because you're very animated.
I'm very animated.
Your microphone is bouncing around all over the place. I was getting what you were saying, but I just thought it was worth pointing out.
Yeah, no, thank you for doing
In case you get any more animated.
Yeah, I do get very excited.
Yes, the idea that peer review, another example of this, a few years ago when I first was suggesting it, we had a day centre up in Cumbria. Now, Cumbria is even worse than Wales, let alone Cornwall, for having lots of isolated little towns with mountains between them and the next little town. And there's a day centre, I won't name the town, which was very keen on developing as a pie, and rather like this idea of peer review to talk it over with somebody, but they said there's nothing comparable to us within 40 miles. So we could, but you'd have to give up an awful lot of time. Of course, we're all using Zoom now, so in some ways that's got a little easier. The abacus now means we can even share some of the data and so on. But my first thought was, well, okay, but is there perhaps a church or a nursery school or a residential centre for older people that you might also talk it over with, that's doing something for their different client group, something sufficiently different that you're not a threat to each other even. So there actually could be positive advantage in going outside of our homelessness and complex needs network to say, look, all people are complex. All social organizations, all environments set up to provide a service to other people have similar kind of dynamics. In other words, there could be times when it's quite useful to actually step outside. And that if you had, say, a drug and alcohol service and a homelessness services working in the same team, you can bet your bottom dollar there's quite a tension between them. I've never come across a homelessness service that didn't have complaints about the drug and alcohol service. And the mental health services as a three-way. Wouldn't it be really interesting to actually get them reviewing each other's pizzazz, using the same process, same language, and asking the same questions? Sorry, Lee, over to you.
I was just going to say that I've yet to sort of sit in on one of Benaxi's or the sort of forums that are across the pathway, but I wouldn't underestimate the underlying competition across services for commission services. So, and how much that hinders airing your sort of dirty laundry or even giving away your best secrets, your 12 tips. So having something that's a bit more diverse in terms of peer review would be really good. And equally, I would back anything related to better co-production, better client involvement in the process. That's what I would say on those two things, really.
Kind of goes back to who's the service really for anyway, doesn't it?
You want to get into the process of learning, don't you, rather than measuring and competing and what have you. That's where you
Oh,
want to get.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can I swing it over slightly to Amanda and Natalie? You both were somewhat similar in some ways to the situation in Camden. You both work with a more specialist service within a larger organisation. And there are similar issues there, I believe, I hear, as to how much you try and sort of propagandize and polemicize and say, this is great stuff, this is stuff you want, and how much how delicate that boundary is. We haven't talked about this in other fields, but I suspect there's something comparable here when we're looking at talking to people outside of your immediate social world.
Yes. Yeah,
I tease you out on little something there.
Yeah, so I would say so, particularly between the kind of care and support and the neighbourhood services, the general needs services, because I guess PI is seen as something fluffy and lovely that care and support and thrive and living well and TIFRES are doing, and that doesn't apply to us in neighbourhood services. So yeah, actually, I met a colleague this morning for coffee before we came out, and we were kind of saying that we are seen, I guess, as the fluffy, nice, supportive services, but underlying that, we still have housing management responsibilities, we still have those legal responsibilities in terms of the management of our properties, but we do it in a really good relational way with our clients, our tenants, our service users. So it's I think and that's probably because we know who we're working with. We work very closely with those people, whereas I think some of the stuff that happens, I guess, in general needs is more transactional, and is, it's 10%. If I used to work in mainstream housing, so as a housing officer, so it was kind of 10% of my time, 90% of my time was spent with 10% of my people on my patch. But I knew those very, very well, and I had that I guess, good relationship with those people, and they I guess, yeah. And I think the rest of the tenants who were on my patch was a very transactional relationship, and I didn't really have that much time to spend with them. But yeah, no, it was very interesting, the conversation that we had this morning with a colleague about, if we can just get, I guess, our housing officers not to be as enforcement heavy, or at least have conversations with people, it might be a little bit different.
Yeah, it's a very similar situation here, I think. Something that kind of in our organisation, we sort of see PI as an umbrella with lots of other principles kind of feeding into that. One of the principles that we're trying to sort of embed as well, and this isn't necessarily from care and support, this is from a HR perspective, this idea of kind of working in a restorative way. So we've been working really closely with Restorative Approaches Wales to try and sort of change that kind of enforcement heavy, punitive approach to doing things, because in the care and support side, we are changing and reviewing a lot of our policies and procedures to reflect that. But I think, again, it's kind of, if you look a bit further out, there's still that kind of, very, very punitive approach, I think. But we're finding that really useful, and kind of having the link with the restorative team, just, really helpful, really. We've all had sort of training on it, and that's kind of running alongside or underneath the PI stuff, I suppose, which is actually having quite a nice effect, I think, in terms of, not just working with service users, but also staff as well, in terms of like conflict management and building relationships as well, which is obviously, it underpins this too. So it all links in really well.
I think I'd just like to come in on the point that Lee made about that the kind of the competitiveness around commissioning and why you might not want to, kind of want to get peer review of your services from, I guess, in kind of other services that are similar to you. So
But
I would
need to be
completely
local.
agree. Yeah.
Bear in mind, they don't need to be local. Well, now we have Zoom, now we have the other. You can do a peer review with somebody in Newcastle.
Yes.
And you're less likely to be chatting to me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, no, and I was just thinking actually internally, as we're setting up our services, so Sian, who leads our older persons living well team, she's very, very pie focused, and I was thinking about her being able to, and her team to be able to come in and look at kind of, I guess, peer review the young person services team, and then whether then just actually having colleagues from neighbourhoods come in and shadow that and see how we're doing it would actually kind of lead to some of that, I guess, maybe wider rollout, as a not a this is not a new fluffy thing that care and support services are doing. But yeah, no, that's been really interesting, and certainly kind of opened my eyes up to kind of that peer review and, I guess, kind of horizontal accountability.
Mm-hmm. Folks, it's just gone 5 minutes to, just 4 minutes to now, and I do try and keep the sort of 2 o'clock boundary, otherwise we get people getting more uncomfortable and then drifting away. We'll have another of these discussions on Thursday, but I'm also seeing these almost as a sort of lost leader for a more ongoing discussion for PI leads about rollout embedding, and including how we do, what is the most effective way to use things like the Pizhouse and the PI Abacus and so on in taking us forward. So I'll end with a plug for joining that more ongoing discussion. There will be another one looking specifically at housing first, where we are again going to be talking about how do you talk to general needs housing, how do you talk to other members of the community, the police, the churches, the libraries, and so on, as you're settling somebody with very, very complex needs into a local area. So these issues are going to continue to embed themselves through these conversations. The one question I would like to quickly ask, I decided on not exactly on a whim, but rather than having another lunchtime discussion for the special interest groups, I'm working on the assumption that we should maybe try something slightly different. So I went for what I call happy hour, 5 till 6, which I know is not going to suit some people with childcare responsibilities who are used to being able to leave the office and be home at 5 to pick up the kids and so on. So I'm not feeling that that's an ideal solution. So I really am open to ideas. Should we make it a 9 till 10 some morning, so you've got the rest of the day to get on with? I don't know what's the best way to do this, but obviously the best way to find out is to ask you. So can I just leave that with you? I've suggested 5 to 6 to begin with, but for those who can't make it, please let me know whether or not you think whether or not you've got a better idea. And we could have more than one in a month. We could have. I don't know what's the best way to do this, and so asking you seemed to be the solves my problem at least. So for now, 2 minutes to. Anybody want a last word?
Just found it very enjoyable, very informative. Thank you. Good to be dipping back into the sort of PI world in a more sort of formal sense in my role again. So this forum is going to be really useful, I think. Hopefully I'll be able to bring something to that as well.
Yeah, good to see you again, Lee. It has been a long while, and good to meet up. I mean, actually, it does seem there's quite a lot happening in Camden, just as there's a lot happening in Westminster. And I'm wondering whether it might even be worthwhile having a discussion much more focused on specific localities, with London as being maybe an obvious place. So if if you would be interested, maybe we could contact Victoria, maybe one or two others, and just have a few really place-based discussions as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy with that. There is a lot that we're doing around Pi within our services, and yeah, I think because of the length of time we've been trying to develop Pi in our services, I think there is a fair amount of knowledge and learning experience, yeah, and we could certainly bring in, you know, some of the people on the ground, the service managers who've been involved as well. I think that'd be really good, yeah.
Okay, let's leave that floating for a little while, but that might be something for after Easter, say, and I did put in there. So it also gives you plenty of time to talk to a few other people and think about what's the best way of doing it and so on. But we are now well into 2 o'clock by about 30 seconds or so, so I'm going to call us to a halt. Thank you so much for, again, another such an interesting, useful discussion. And I hope I'll see more of you in more of these.
Thank you very much.
Cheers,
Bye.
folks.
Bye.
Phew.